Yeah, better get the milk ready because this one's about to get spicy. First, a little criteria, because the thumbnail with this series always suggests a binary choice. Good or bad, right or wrong, dogs or cats, but with all of these, there are many asterisks attached. And I feel the need to mention that here more than ever, because there are going to be different categories depending on the way in which each Season 2 is handled. In this case, the story of 2 Season 2s in one ring, and the production of 2 different Season 2s in another. It'll make more sense as we go on, but just know that because I say both X's had poor Season 2s, doesn't mean they got the same things wrong. And added to that, I understand that a Season 2 can also feel largely arbitrary, especially for series adapted from a manga, as the end of a season almost always coincides with the end of an arc. And for that reason, comparing second seasons can likewise seem pretty pointless, because it's not as if there's some standard even shonen series adhere to. Heck, first seasons as well, come to think of it. So even in that case, is it fair to contrast, say, The Promised Neverland and HinikuHou's first seasons at 12 and 13 episodes with Black Clover, which is 52? Yeah, probably not. Though, if we wanted to go that route, I think Hunter x Hunter's first season kinda takes the cake without question. Hooray for loopholes thanks to production cycles. But that's why when we get to talking about the content of Season 2s, it's gonna be a bit more general. I'll dive more into that when we get to it though, so with that being said, let's do this. Despite the mentioned inconsistencies with Season 2s, there are some general guidelines most series will stick to. By the end of the first 13 to 26 episodes, the introductory arcs that give you a sense of the world and characters you'll be getting to know should largely be complete. This paves the way for new characters, be they allies, opponents, or enemies, to be introduced with the new arc, or in our case, season. You see this in everything from My Hero Academia, to the 7 Deadly Sins, to Bungou Stray Dogs. It's the nature of storytelling in these continuous arc-based series. And while it may then be fair to compare the direction each series chooses to take with its following installment, that's ultimately more of a manga-centric discussion, as the individual studios don't have much control when it comes to what they adapt. The most freedom they would likely get would be in the form of filler, but none of these series we're discussing really dealt with that issue in their second seasons, and while they still do play a role that we'll talk about in just a bit, we're going to focus on them a little bit more when it comes to the heavier anime-oriented issues a Season 2 might face. So sticking with the source material and focusing only on content, the 3 series mentioned prior are the ones we're going to be talking about, with 2 in particular being placed under the microscope for easier comparison. They all have several commonalities, namely in the form of their powers and subsequent progression in their use or development, very clear group dynamics, and that each series sees the rise of an enemy that threatens great change to the status quo for the main characters. With HinikuHou, that's Stain, for the 7 Deadly Sins, it's the 10 Commandments, and in Bungou Stray Dogs, you have the Guild. The execution is obviously going to be different for each series, but looking at this common ground, to me, there is a clear Obi-Wan and Anakin. Those being Bungou Stray Dogs and 7 Deadly Sins, respectively. HinikuHou is also pretty good for these aspects, but just kinda ends up being the odd show out. Plus, I just thought it'd be nice to, mix it up a little bit, because I am kinda known for, to put it cordially, sucking HinikuHou's dick. Bungou Stray Dogs Season 2 does have a bit of an unfair advantage though, with me being American, and therefore enjoying getting to see all the guild members, who are American authors, in action. Because my star-spangled ass has been pre-programmed since middle school to recognize most of them, so I can't help but let out a deep chuckle in horror when I see f***ing H.P. Lovecraft on the opposing team. Even so, it's a clever addition to an already compelling story that immediately targets a wider audience and has you guessing 1, just what their power is, and 2, how it relates to their respective works. I shouldn't say they don't spell it out for you because, well, they literally do. But it's only the name, so it's up to you to decipher whatever deeper meaning there may be. And as the season progresses, an interesting and changing dynamic between the 3 principal parties at play begins to form. There's also the fact that the first arc of Season 2 set up very clear parallels to the overall climax of the season, but we'll get to that in just a bit. First, we have to switch gears to the 7 Deadly Sins. And my god, its Season 2 easily felt the most like a second season out of anything that's going to be mentioned in this video, and that's not really a compliment. At the outset, everyone gets spiffy new outfits because, hey, it's a new installment and we gotta mix things up. And you know what also would be good to throw in now after 24 episodes?
Power levels!
Because Hawk really needed more things to do, huh? It feels very forced to suddenly add in this system that plenty of series have already proven is arbitrary. And yet, it feels like the mangaka realized this to a degree because power levels aren't really mentioned all that frequently or utilized to the same degree as you think they would be considering the first few episodes of Season 2. They're just an attempt to convey how strong the enemy, or Meliodas, is. But with how much power levels are proven to fluctuate, it just feels needless. Like the worst kind of telling instead of showing. I don't know how much control, if any really, the anime's staff had over the inclusion or exclusion of these elements. Speaking of which, Season 2 did have a different director and largely speaking different personnel compared to Season 1. I'm not saying the original people at the helm would have been able to completely sidestep these components, but it's possible they would have been handled differently while still in conjunction with the mangaka's intent. Season 1 ended things in a pretty different fashion compared to the manga, to the point where certain things had to be retconned at the beginning of Season 2, i.e. basically all the falling action of that last episode. And while it's possible this was done because the staff didn't know whether a second season would ever be made, it's certainly not the first time this has happened, it's still proof that alteration wasn't out of the question. But that already involves a lot of hypotheticals, so rather than create even more, let's just get to the main antagonists of Season 2, the Ten Commandments. Compared to the likes of the Guild or even Stain, they don't feel as immediately imposing or impactful. Rather, at least as far as the anime went, I don't think they ever really reached their potential as antagonists. Spoiler alert, just skip like 10 seconds ahead. They do kill Meliodas, but that proves not to be the biggest deal. He comes back after all, but a majority of them don't really get fleshed out all that much. You learn some interesting backstory for a few, but I'm struggling to think of any moments that stood out where they felt like more than just your typical evil posse. Maybe my expectations were misplaced. It wouldn't be the first time, because both openings for this second season, which the studio does have much greater control over, mind you, teased two big epic clashes between the sins and the commandments. Neither of which ended up happening. Sure, members of the two groups fight each other at various points, but nothing like the everyone versus everyone clash that I was expecting. It's just an extension of a larger issue that pervaded Season 2, splitting up the sins. Yet, you know, for a series called The 7 Deadly Sins, the amount of time we actually spend with all of them together is pretty low. We don't even meet Escanor until the second half of Season 2, and I realize it's hard to have 7 characters, or 8 if you count Elizabeth, all get focus and development when they're together. Because they're all going to have different motivations, not all of which may pertain to the goal of the group. So while I don't necessarily fault the series for splitting up the sins, there will always be a part of me that can't get behind it. Some of my favorite parts of the series have always been when the sins were all together, for both the fights and just the interactions between everyone. I want to see that group dynamic, so it just sucks to see Bon and King leave while Deanne loses her memories and literally vanishes from the story for 7 episodes. Maybe it was that sense of togetherness and unity that got retconned the hell out of Season 1, but I wasn't really expecting the graph for Sin membership to basically equate to one bell curve after another. But again, it's not really the anime's fault. The staff were just following the guidelines set up in the manga. They didn't have the luxury of being able to shuffle anything around or add bits from other parts of canon like spin-off manga or light novels, as most that exist are entirely comedic or inherently non-canon. Which brings us back to Bungou Stray Dogs. But first, surprise! Hello from the future. As I edit this, I realize I should have been more fair with the 7 Deadly Sins and actually mentioned some of the parts I did enjoy, as it's not like I found the second season unwatchable by any means. Bon, despite eventually going almost entirely off on his own, did get some more development / backstory, and seeing as how he's my favorite character in the show, that was great to see. Escanor, when he did enter the story, was also terrific, and I will gladly still go back any day and watch his fight with Estarossa because it was just a lot of fun start to finish. Watching Meliodas and Bon just casually destroy their opponents during the mini-tournament arc was hilarious, and reminded me a lot of that scene in Season 1 where they just kinda casually broke out of jail without realizing it. And lastly, both OPs for the second season slap harder than the girls from Asobi Asobase. So yeah, just thought I'd toss those in there. Now, we can get to Bungou Stray Dogs. The ongoing manga is the core of what is being adapted into the anime and is following a present-day storyline. It flows cohesively, it's not as if parts are left out, yet the staff at Bones chose to adapt some of the canonical light novel material as backstory segments, mainly for Dazai. And while these do serve as an insight into him and his past, gradually building up a better understanding, the mini arc at the start of Season 2 in particular was phenomenal for more reasons than just that. The tone shift is a bit jarring for how different it is to the series proper, but you get over that pretty fast as you're immersed in this more atmospheric and melancholic setting. There's immediate chemistry and obvious camaraderie between Dazai, Ango, and Oda that we then see continually developed and tested over the course of 4 episodes. There are some really nice moments before shit inevitably hits the fan, and that fan then falls on them. But my favorite aspect of this backstory arc is how it sets up the rest of the season perfectly. The central conflict of this arc and the season at large are one and the same at their foundation. That being a feud involving 3 separate groups of gift-wielding individuals. The details aren't exactly identical, but it'd be pretty odd if they were, especially the climax, which presents almost a fork in the road where we effectively get to see what could have happened to the opposite party. If Dazai had been there with Oda, he likely wouldn't have died, and likewise either Akutagawa or Atsushi would have perished in a fight with Fitzgerald had they both not been aboard the Moby Dick. And seeing as how it was Dazai who facilitated that encounter in the first place, it seems like he learned from his past mistake. Even though the motivations were completely different, Dazai being fueled by his friendship with Oda, while our other odd couple was sustained by a mutualistic hate boner for both Fitzgerald and each other. When paired together, these 2 arcs are a showcase of how to adapt and make use of everything you have. And this isn't meant as a direct chide at 7 Deadly Sins because again, they didn't have the same opportunity. But certainly, Bungo Stray Dogs sends a strong message about making the most of the material you're given. And if we're talking about making the most out of the original work, then obviously we have to mention both Mob Psycho and One Punch Man. If you're at all familiar with these works, then you're likely aware of the state they both initially released in, those being webcomics that rose to popularity through strong and entertaining stories more than pretty art. Though One Punch Man did eventually get that going for it as well, with it being redone in a physical format by Yusuke Murata. And of course, both Mob Psycho and One Punch Man were eventually adapted into anime by 2 of everyone's favorite studios, Bones and Madhouse respectively. At least for their first seasons, because while Bones and I believe basically the entire staff returned for the 2nd season of Mob, most of you are now aware of the rather infamous change in both studio and staff for One Punch Man. And plenty of videos have already been made discussing that change and the subsequent effects it has had on animation quality, and whether or not that should matter for one's overall enjoyment. So I'm not really gonna dwell on it, but in my opinion, a production cycle should be something more along the lines of what Mob Psycho was given, full stop, 2nd season or otherwise. Not for animation quality reasons though, that's merely a perk. The real reason for me is that I would hope a better schedule ultimately means less hectic conditions and crazy hours for the animators involved. Granted, I don't know if this is a hard and fast rule or that good animation always means no animators were harmed in the making of this show. There are always going to be exceptions in that regard, but ideally proper scheduling and time should mean both a better end result and while not better pay necessarily, hopefully less overworking. Hey everyone, jumping in here again because I am about to mention KyoAni. I recorded it back before the senseless tragedy happened, and while I don't talk about them much, I felt like I should at least include the ways you can help if you want to. I do have a different call to action at the end of this video for the Animator Dormitory project, and while I think you should still keep them in mind for the future, down below I'll also be including links to both the GoFundMe for KyoAni and their site where you can buy digital scans to support them directly if you choose. Give if you're able to, and hope along with me and everyone that this is the last time we need to see something this awful happen to the industry, medium, and people that have brought us so much joy and happiness. Pray for and thank you, KyoAni, and enjoy the rest of the video. That's one of the many reasons Kyoto Animation is praised after all, because it's not unusual for one of their shows to be completed by the time the first episode starts airing, as was the case with Violet Evergarden. They're also noted as normally having smaller staff for a lot of productions, proving that, yeah, it is time that counts. And no, animation is not always the defining factor for what makes a show, or in this case Season 2, better. But in terms of production schedule for both of one's works, it's no question that Mob Psycho is how you handle it, not One Punch Man. Mob Psycho had somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 episodes complete when its first episode started airing. I want to say there was a staff member who was even bragging with how far ahead they were. And then contrast that with One Punch Man that had 2 complete when the first episode started airing. As a result, everyone set their expectations accordingly for each, and while you could argue whether that fact alone is a good or bad thing, ideally it's something that should have been avoided. And it's not like this was at all dictated by the source material like previous examples, nor the studio. It's something the people in charge, the production committees, and people above them have control over and should get better at. And hey, to their slim bit of credit, maybe they are. We no longer live in the age of continuous Shonen Jump adaptations, only Black Clover and One Piece still fit that mold. Plus, you have situations like the recent news surrounding Black Fox, the next anime being produced by Studio 3 Hertz. Full link to the Sakuga blog article below, as it's a great read, but essentially it paints a picture of a production that, had the executives conducted business as usual, would have seen a spectacularly poor schedule due to the director being tapped to work on Run with the Wind and its own poorly planned production cycle at the same time. Instead, the planned format for Black Fox was changed from TV anime to movie and pushed back, so the team behind it ended up with much more time to work on it. And evidently, they were able to complete it ahead of schedule and to the point where they were satisfied. The article largely echoes the same sentiment about better scheduling and working conditions leading to better results in the end. So while animation may not be the end-all be-all for a production, there's no reason why it should have to be placed on the chopping block to begin with. But this tangent has already gone on for long enough, and I don't want to stray even further off topic. Point being though, productions like Black Fox and Mob aren't all that common in this industry. For every one of them, there may well be a dozen like One Punch Man or Black Clover, and that's something that I think has to change. In the end, there are many ways, both from an adaptation and production standpoint, to handle a second season. We've seen plenty that adhere to the industry standard, but others that prove it can and should be done better. Continuing to build on what's come before and doing so in a way that will satisfy both your audience and animators is, in my book, the key to making it a successful outing on every level. But those are just my impassioned thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours. I mean, I really hope you agree with me about the production cycle note and that animators should be paid better, but either way, you should kick some money over to the Animator Dormitory project. Looks like their 2019 campaign has started up, so I'll provide a link to that down below and in the comments. It's a really great organization that houses up-and-coming animators, so yeah, definitely think about contributing. But aside from that, what's your favorite second season of something? Anything that didn't quite live up to your expectations? Any and all comments are welcome down below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, an especially big thanks goes out to my awesome patrons, HinikuHou, OverjoyedSoup, MVPino, James Morton, Marbled Ranger, Spudge, Beorn, and everyone else whose support helps make videos like these possible. Links to that Patreon if you'd like to join them, my shirts, and everything else are either down below or on the screen right now. Leave a like and click that bell icon to keep up to date, or just follow me on Twitter. Stay awesome, and I'll see you next time.